Good morning.
Good morning.
We are live. Welcome to Braveheart Conversations. I'm Jillian Aurora, and this is my co-host Marie Wallace.
Hi, guys.
And we join you every week here live Thursday mornings. You can find us on our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/Braveheart Conversations. You can also find us for all of our previous episodes, either in the group or if you like to listen to your podcasts on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean. We are on all the places as well. Today, we are excited to talk about grief and loss. I say excited lightly because it's not a super exciting topic, but it's a really necessary
It's a request.
topic. It is a request. So we really honor and love when people share their topic requests with us. And this was one that someone requested specifically as a widow, and that how different that experience is. Maybe say different than someone who's been divorced or had experienced a different kind of loss. And so today I want to honor all the different types of loss. We all have different versions of it. Nobody gets to escape what I call the winter season, right? The fall and winter seasons are really natural cycles of life. And so we're going to experience some loss no matter what. But there's a specific grief that happens when you lose someone physically. And whether that is, I've had a lot of, for me personally, I've had a lot of addiction experience in my past with loved ones. And so there's often that fear that will keep us entangled in relationships because there's a legitimate understanding. We know that there's a risk of losing someone to their addiction. And I've witnessed seeing that happen. And then there's just the, regular life circumstances. We have people that die in accidents. My brother died in an accident. It's hard not to find someone who has experienced a loss in some sort of a random accident or an illness. And it's tough. It's tricky. It's not forever. Like, you do work through the grief, but it's a long, hard process that you don't really get to you don't get to get out of it.
No.
The only way is through it. So let's talk about the steps through grief, how we move through it, and even the benefits, because I find that there are some benefits, even though like the winter season is not pleasant. There's really nothing that's like fun about it. It does clear the path for spring. And it's a reflection of everything that you've just experienced, right? In summer and harvest and like all those prior seasons, we get to reflect and celebrate as we walk through the grief of that ending season.
Yeah.
So, Marie, what comes up for you as you think about grief and moving through that process?
So I went through a period not too long ago where I had 12 pretty close people to me, about a little over 2 years. So it was a lot of loss in a very short amount of time, and it was overwhelming. It was one of the reasons this person requested us to talk about it was that sometimes people don't know how to react when you've had a loss, especially when you had quite a few things happen in your loss, and they don't know how to talk to you. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to even approach you because they either may not have had the experience in the same way that you've had, or they don't understand the intensity is to. Sometimes it's being honoring and saying, I'm going to give them their space. And oftentimes what happens is we really need to be included, to be more included. And so the specific person that asked about this was a widow, and she felt marginalized because other people around her, she wasn't included in relationship talks or love talks. And because she had lost her person, didn't get to still experience them in the same way. So I think that those are some of the things that we get to talk about today, is what do we say when someone has this loss, or what do we say when someone's experiencing grief. There's a lot of grief these days with things going on in the world, with the racial talks, with COVID, with school closures. I know those are big topics that people are really learning to deal with, that things are not the same as they were before. And like you said, in some ways it's good, but there's still so much to deal with before we can get to that place.
Yeah, so good. I like the acknowledgement too of just what we're going through right now. Like, I think a lot of people are experiencing grief in isolation, however that manifests for you. Like, we're being told to stay distant from each other.
When we crave connection, right? Yeah, that's been hard.
And it's been a long season of that. So I think that is, it's normal to experience those things in grief, but it doesn't make it any easier. I do really love what you touched on, which is how to treat someone, how to support someone who's going through grief. And that could be someone who's grieving the living, or someone who's grieving a loss of life. I find that those difficult conversations are often avoided because they're uncomfortable. So for me, this has been in two different scenarios. So one was, my brother died when he was 18. It was a young loss, and he was just in a hiking accident. It was really a fluke and very unexpected. And so people would like, I don't know what to say to that. Or they would ask, well, how did he die? And then I would tell them, and it was like they realized that they misstepped, is what it felt like. And then they really wanted to change the topic, or like,
especially if we show any emotion at all, then all of a sudden they're like, I don't know what to do with these feelings, whether it's anger or grief, or because sometimes you get really pissed off when you have a loss, and people are like, I don't know how to deal with that. And so
and I think what has been hard for me when I've experienced loss is sometimes I get, I feel put in a position that I need to cater to someone else's discomfort when I'm the one grieving. So then it's like, I have to like manage your emotions now because you don't know how to handle this. So, I mean, that can be just such an awkward position to be in when you're grieving. So I think just, grief is uncomfortable no matter what, but you can tell when someone they're willing to hang with it. They're not trying to escape the topic, but they're willing to be in it with you and not try to fix it. That's another big one, is that, and I can totally relate. If I see a problem, I want to jump in and give you all of the things you can do.
That's what happens when we're
coaches. Because I'm such an overfunctioner, right? For me, it's way more uncomfortable to be leaning back and just observing and just listening. I just want to be in it. The more I can do, the better I feel, because that's a coping skill. So for me, practicing the listening piece and leaning back is really important.
I also think that it's an individual thing, that we forget that everyone handles that differently, and I think that's been a little bit difficult for some people to navigate, and also just to know that there's you might misstep, but it's okay. It's the inquiring and saying, how can I support you? There might be questions that you can ask, because some people in grief want to just be left alone. Some people want to talk. Some people need consoling. So it's as individual as we are, and that's something to consider, is how we are approaching the other person, is to give them room and space, and the listening piece, whether it's listening to you can see a lot in their body language that looks inviting to talk or might be closed off. You can just really be observant of the nonverbal behavior before you do approach. I think that's a piece of advice that I would give, just in how to approach that.
And I think acknowledging too, you know, how can I support you? And just asking that question, how can I support you, instead of assuming that everybody's going to be the same way. I know for me, experiencing a different type of grief when I divorced, that was a whole different, you know, life transition. And that was like what we've talked about before, grieving the living. The person was still alive, but you're still grieving the relationship. And for me, I felt really overwhelmed. Like a lot of people did want to help, and I did need some help. And then there were times I wanted to just say, you know, I just need to be alone for a while. Like I just need to feel this, and I just need to process.
So even in the individual, it goes in waves. Sometimes you need people, and sometimes you're like, yeah, I need to step back.
And it was hard sometimes feeling that people were offended when I would say, I really just need some space. So again, it's that catering to their emotions because they're uncomfortable. So I think just being able to check yourself when you're trying to support someone. It's about them and their needs, whether that's being left alone, whether that's just an acknowledgement, hey, I'm here. If you need anything, if you need a meal, you need an ear, you need anything, like just let me know. I think reassuring them that they have the steering wheel is really important. And then, you know, checking in with them occasionally.
I'll follow your lead. You lead, I'll follow.
Totally. Yeah, that's really important. I want to touch a little bit too on grieving the living, because that was a kind of a different experience for me. They're both uncomfortable, like for other people. They're uncomfortable. People didn't really want to talk about, like they could maybe talk about the divorce and loss of the relationship, but when you start talking about abusiveness, or you start talking about some of the experiences, the traumatic experiences, people tend to not want to get into that territory.
Right.
And that can be really isolating. And I've seen that happen for women a lot, where they don't want to take sides. They don't really want to go there. And that can really contribute to women staying quiet. So whatever the specific type of grief is, again, it is so much about holding space and validating and acknowledging what they're going through. You may not have experienced whatever it is that they experienced. You may not have experienced trauma in a relationship. You may not have experienced the sudden loss of a partner or a loved one, but like just attempting to step into their shoes and validating whatever they're feeling is right and okay.
Well, chances are none of us experience it the same way as the other person has anyway. We have to acknowledge that. I mean, that's not a newsflash, that we each handle our grief in a different way. Going back to the widow person is acknowledging the love that they had and embracing that. And if they're open and in a space of wanting to celebrate that relationship, sometimes that's a good way to honor, so that they can cherish the memories and they can cherish what they did really love about the relationship and hold on to that. I think one of the things because we talk about love a lot, is actually having that person that you've loved so much and loved so deeply and been so connected. There's still other ways to connect, and just again back to listening and holding space. How can I honor you in this situation? Is they want to be included. They want to not be pushed off to the sides, because they still have this great love. It didn't go away, and so it's a loss of a relationship, but not a loss of love. And so I just wanted to address that a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. I think what's coming up for me too is also addressing the person who is grieving, instead of like right now we've been addressing how to support someone who's grieving. But if you are the person grieving,
that's a good one.
yes, it feels good to be supported by people around you, and we're also responsible for our own healing and our own receiving of love. So, like,
And
for
coping,
me,
yeah.
what was very true was often grieving comes not just in one person, but like a whole piece of my life died. That relationship died, but that like had a
Your
huge
friends,
ripple effect.
yeah.
All my friends were different. The home I was living in was different. Like,
The way you experience
different.
life is different.
Everything changed for me. So it wasn't just one piece of grief. It was a lot of grief. And what I got to acknowledge too was some of those pieces, it was an intentional letting go. Mm-hmm. So some of the old friends who were, perhaps really supportive to me in the past were not really great fits for me moving forward. And so just like acknowledging that they're not bad people, it wasn't a fitting relationship anymore, and releasing that without judgment, because maybe they couldn't hold space for me grieving, but then inviting in intentionally new people who were capable of holding space for my grief, or even like addressing that widow, like finding a widows group. Or for me, like I was really involved with other people who had left abusive relationships, who had left marriages. Like those were important to me, knowing that somebody else had walked that path already, and that they had
probably had some tools that would help you
some wisdom that I needed. So adapting my whole situation and my whole life to best support me. Like, I'm still responsible for walking myself to the bread store, right?
Exactly.
And there's an example that I've liked for a long time, which is I used to go to a lot of auto shops expecting a loaf of bread. So I'd go in and I got my $5, give me a loaf of bread. And it doesn't work that way, right? They're going to look at you and say, well, that's not what we do here, right? And I can either throw a tantrum and say, I have my $5, like this is enough to buy a loaf of bread. I know you can do it, and I did that for years. Instead of acknowledging that there's plenty of bread stores that I can walk myself to, and that's a much easier way to get my needs met. So the way for me that translates is I can find people who I'm trying to force them to be able to meet my needs. And the reality is there's a lot of people who just aren't going to get your grief, and they're not going to understand how to support you, and they're not going to give you what you need. And you can try to force them to be that bread store and that person, or you can acknowledge there are a lot of people who do get you, who do understand grief, and you can go towards those resources. And that was hard for me because I really wanted certain people to be able to play those roles. But I wasn't getting myself anywhere, and I certainly wasn't happy trying to force those people to play those roles. So part of grief to me is acknowledging reality and accepting where people are at. And it's not that they were trying to be unsupportive. They just didn't have the tools. They're an auto shop. They do something different, right? So taking the responsibility to get myself to the resources that are really going to support me was really vital. I'm not at the mercy of anybody else.
No. Which is an important topic. I'm glad you brought that up. With COVID, so many things changed. And going back to when you were talking about your relationship and how much your whole life had changed. And every one of us has been impacted for the rest of our lives. Our whole lives have changed. And so learning to deal with that in a big way, being able to get the support that we need in whatever area of our life that has changed is super important. So I'm glad you brought that up, because with school closures, with loss of jobs, with just how we live our normal everyday life, it's learning to monitor and adjust and go get the resources that we do. So exactly, we are responsible for our own, healing and our own happiness. And so, yeah, that's a very important point to make.
And safety too.
And safety.
I learned where my safe relationships were, and even like COVID and all of the unrest that's happened has also given me clarity where there's safety and non-judgment, where I can go to have safe and open-hearted conversations.
Even if they don't understand what's going on with you, they are a safe place.
Or even if they don't agree with me.
Right, or they don't agree.
But we can there's still a safe container that we can respect each other. And then acknowledging where maybe that's not the case. That person is not a safe container to have these conversations. And at the end of the day, I'm the one that's responsible to decide where I'm gonna go, right? Where I'm going to pursue relationships that are going to be most supportive and what's the word I'm looking for? Like productive, I guess. Because I want to grow, right?
You want to move forward.
Yeah, that's my goal. So I don't want to be in stagnant relationships. I don't want to be in relationships where there's a bunch of fighting that isn't productive. It's unconstructive conversations. I want to be choosing relationships that are getting me to my highest potential and growth. And so our situations change constantly. Our relationships change, our grief and loss changes, everything is changing and in flux. And so some relationships that may at one point have supported you very well, at another point are maybe not the best fits. So learning to just adapt and change and flow with your relationships and circumstances is really, it's a responsibility and it's a gift when we can do that. The more resistance that we're putting into those changes, the harder it is to make it through. And your grief is going to be compounded if you're fighting the process and fighting, who's there for you and who isn't.
Fighting to be that butterfly. And like we talk about, as we talk about the winter seasons, there's also that the spring is coming, and to have something in place to look forward to, so that we know that while this grief is happening and while we're healing, there's still this new thing and the possibilities and the plethora of possibilities that can happen from that, which goes back to the beginning when we said sometimes there are some positive things that happen. Maybe you create new relationships that fulfill you in a different way, or allow you to see a different aspect of yourself, or so there is some possibilities. Did we have questions?
For some reason it didn't pop up here,
okay.
But I think I have only seen people. Yeah, we just have a couple people popping in. Yeah, so I think there was another piece that was. I lost that thought. Winter season. Yeah, I think spring is really important. As you go through winter, there are things happening, right, that you don't even really perceive. It can seem like it's just bleak. It's cold. Everything's dead and gray and gloomy. But the things that you're not seeing is that winter season is so important and absolutely necessary for the spring to come, right? Those plants are benefiting from the spring.
The nutrients and the rest. And
yeah, they're getting that rejuvenating period. They are in so many ways preparing for that springtime. And so there's a trust that gets to happen as we're walking through those grieving times, that there is a spring coming, and we don't see all of the benefits happening as we are sitting in this just mucky, icky, bleak place. Springtime it's coming, and it's that blank canvas, right? All of these things are happening that you get to create intentionally. So if you lost a relationship, yeah, that sucks. It's really difficult to step through that. And you have now the potential, you have all this space for a new relationship. And whether that comes through loss of life, like being widowed, like you now have this, you've created this space, or the universe has created this space for you, or you lose a relationship because you let them go, like a divorce. You're creating such a space of growth where you can have this springtime. And I leaned into that a lot when I went into that divorce period. I just kept thinking, like, I have a blank canvas. What am I going to create with this blank canvas?
I wonder what's next.
Yeah.
Being curious.
So there's a whole creative energy that comes from winter that you didn't have access to before because your life was full. You weren't really able to accept anything new. So in the process of death, you have this whole great space for newness. So I think that there was another aspect of what you shared with that widow who was saying, maybe also acknowledging how we can add in other relationships and have a big foundation while we're in relationship. And I just want to briefly touch on that. I know that that's not the whole topic today, but it is so important to have a foundation. It doesn't take away from your love. So if you have a deep, healthy romantic relationship, you can still have a whole other wing of your life, whether that's professionally or, your girlfriends or your, whatever your other thing is.
It doesn't dishonor, it only adds.
It only adds. So I know that was another piece that was important to her that we address, was that we
have relationships outside of our romantic partner.
Yeah, because that loss can feel so much harder.
If we've never built anything around, I know, like for Joe and I, we make sure we have girl time and boy time. I have friends that are outside of our relationship, and then you're not depending on one person to take care of all your needs, because there is not a one-stop shop. Because while there is a bread store, there's also an auto store and a few other places that you get to go visit, and so that only enriches your relationship, and it does take away that codependent piece that we sometimes have if we're with a partner that we really adore, not that we don't really adore them, but having those other relationships and getting our needs met from those other relationships can only enhance that partnership.
Absolutely. I think that was a huge piece when I did make that step to divorce. I had been in recovery in Al-Anon for several years, and they had really encouraged me to build other aspects of my life, and I'm so grateful that was the case, because I didn't have as big of a loss. It was still like, it was life-changing. It was heartbreaking. It was hard, but I also had developed my own interests. I had developed my own career. I had friendships that were independent of my marriage, and that was incredibly important in rebuilding.
And more fulfilling. You feel more full.
Absolutely. Yep. It helps if you are going to experience grief, and even if you don't, you're still adding to yourself and your relationship. So I don't think I've seen any questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap that up.
Thanks for showing up, you guys.
Yeah, thanks for being here to talk about grief and loss. It's never a super easy topic, but it is absolutely just part of life. Like, if you're living and breathing and have a pulse, then you're going to experience loss at some point. So
don't shut it off.
No, go into it, go through it. There is light on the other side of the tunnel. If you have any questions for us, follow-up questions, or you have a topic that you'd like us to address, then please reach out. We love topic requests. You can reach out to me personally at defytheaverage@gmail.com, or you can reach out to Marie
at mariesgold.com.
Or, of course, like we've said before, you're welcome to reach out through our Facebook group. You can join discussions there, or just send us a message. Facebook.com/groups/BraveHeartConversations. Again, you can find all of our previous episodes at iTunes, Spotify, Podbean,
all the things.
Yeah. And with that, I hope that you have a phenomenal week, and we will see you again next Thursday morning.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.